Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to today's episode of How You're Getting Fucked. I'm your host, Kogi Lumpur. Today we're going to cover a propaganda piece on how the real problem with cashless isn't the fact that it's being used as a key part of a systemic movement to erode people's privacy to track where you're going, what you're doing, what you're buying, and shove more ads in your face. No, the real problem with cashless, according to this article published over the weekend, is that some teenagers and old people can't seem to get into it. Yeah, because that's the real problem with cashless. We have a lot to unpack in today's video, but before we get into that, let me get something out of the way. What I'm about to cover over here is a news story from Singapore. And some of you might probably be thinking, well, I don't live in Singapore. I live in America, or I live in Europe, I live in Australia, I live in Japan or India. What does this have to do with me? You might say that you're never going to live in Singapore or even Asia if you're from some other continent, and the most you'll ever be in these countries is a tourist. So why the hell should I care? But let me tell you something. In my opinion, that's a dangerous and stupid mindset to have, because I've been saying it for years now that Singapore is a spoiler alert for what they want to happen in every single country, which is to be a surveillance state where companies have all the rights and the common person, the individual, you, will own nothing and be happy. Quite literally, 3/4 of the Singapore population doesn't even own the property that they live in, and they seem quite fine with that. This is not my opinion. This is not a stat that I made up. You can literally go onto Google and ChatGPT and look up Singapore HDB population and find this number for yourself. So if you can't imagine what your country is going to be like if you don't push back against things like flock cameras, aka AI surveillance cameras they're trying to market to people as ALPR, car plate reading cameras to prevent crime, or things like the chat control bill if you're living in the European Union, or one of those also convenient digital IDs, or if you don't push for people's rights again, right? Whether that's right to repair, right to own stuff that you bought and paid for, right to privacy. Well, you don't really need to use your imagination on how your country is going to be like, because there's actually a place that you can visit right now by booking a flight ticket with most of that dystopian future that you and your countrymen have been fighting back against where you're living implemented, and everyone seems to be happy with that. This isn't even a meme. They even approved insects as of a year ago in 2024. So literally, you will own nothing, you will eat the bugs, and you will be happy in Singapore. So back to the news story over here that we have in hand. As cashless-only stores continue to pop up across Singapore, some teens and seniors feel left out. Brought to you by one of the many mouthpieces of Singapore. What this piece of propaganda goes into over here is a sob story of how cashless is bad because some high schooler who can't have access to a debit or credit card can't make a purchase at Starbucks. They talk about how cashless only stores are becoming more prevalent because it's also convenient, and of course it's so hygienic, right? In white people countries, it's think of the safety of your children. In Asian countries, it's for your health and safety, bro. I don't even know how locals in Singapore don't see through this bullshit excuse, because Singapore was literally one of the most paranoid countries when it came to Corgi-19. Mandatory mask even when you're walking outside where the weather is literally a Florida summer year-round. 33 degrees Celsius, 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and sunny most of the year with 70%, 80%, 90% humidity. Voluntary and totally not mandatory vaccines, except you couldn't get anywhere without one. So no jab, no job, to the point where companies could legally fire you for not getting it, because we love employees so much and we love their rights. No malls, where most of the shops are at and most of the population spends their time in because of said permanent Fort Lauderdale summer weather. No eating in restaurants, no gyms, no concerts, no cruises, no theme parks, no going out of the country without coming back in, having to sit in quarantine for 2 weeks, where law enforcement literally comes to your home to check and make sure that you are quarantined, and they come unannounced as if you're on parole. Ask me how I know that. With all of that, it makes sense that Singapore was one of the last countries to drop all the mandates somewhere in like late 2022 or early 2023. I don't remember the exact month, but it was some time around then. What didn't make sense, however, was how one of the most paranoid countries on earth, right? Because literally most of the population thought the moment you get it, you're going to the ICU where you're going to have to fight for your life. Was one of the first places to also want people to return to office in 2021. 2021. Keep in mind, most of those big tech companies and large companies, multinational corporations that you see in the news have only wanted RTO since like 2023. Singapore was ahead of the curve with so many offices wanting people to return as early as 2021, despite being the most paranoid of the virus. And this isn't some like weak pussy white people shit where they want people to return to the office like 2 days a week or 3 days a week. They wanted you to return 5 days a week in 2021. And I actually know a couple of people who worked in places where their offices were actually secretly mandating everyone to go back to the office every single day, despite all those social distancing and staggered return to work schedule rules, still being in place. So yeah, for your health and safety, we gotta go cashless. This article goes on to mention that 14 out of 100 shops in 4 sample malls in major shopping districts were cashless only, a lot of them being food and beverage. More propaganda on how cashless is better in the next parts of the article, right? So the queues are so short, transactions are so easy, fewer errors, and the fact that, you, Mr. Consumer, can go back to consuming more products so we can make you get back to being excited to consume even more products yet again. Just a lot more propaganda in the rest of this article. I'll leave this to you to read yourself if you want to, but the long story short is cashless is faster, cashless is cheaper, cashless is more better, cashless is the future. And then later on in this news story, they give another example on how another teenager over here can't seem to get around because things are cashless. A maid, aka a migrant worker, and some old people, are having trouble with digital things and they don't have any credit or debit cards. This is the real problem with cashless, not because it's all these companies that infringe on your rights and privacy and they're trying to track you. Banks are doing things like spamming your email inbox, ask me how I know, with useless bullshit ads that they're disguising as information that you might need, and they make it really hard to unsubscribe from. No, it's not any of that. Cashless, this real problem is that teenagers and some old people are struggling to use it. The whole vibe that this story gives, right? The moral of the story that they seem to want readers who read this article and use 0 brain cells to process anything beyond face value, which, let's face it, is most of the population in many countries nowadays, but especially in Southeast Asia, where people literally read the article and they want to know what to think based on the article. Well, we need to figure out some way to make sure our young consumers under the age where they can get a debit or credit card get to consume in a way that we can digitally track their purchases. And unless they're like really old people or bottom of the barrel immigrants like made to make a few $100 a month, or you're some fringe weirdo in society, why aren't you using cashless, bro? That's the way to go. If you read this article through and through like I did, you'll notice that it's all praises for cashless. Not a single con in this entire article, because there aren't any. Trust the science, bro. No mention of privacy implications, where every cashless purchase you make is automatically tracked by default, because I don't even think that most of the population in Southeast Asia is aware of what they call a merchant category code, despite dealing with it literally every single time they use their credit card. So if you don't know what a MCC, merchant category code, is, every time you make a transaction on your credit card or debit card, it's tagged internally with said code that tells the bank and credit card processor if you've made a purchase at a grocery store, at a department store, gas station, restaurant, bookstore, freaking cab rides. That's the same mechanism that enables credit cards to give you bonus points if you're pumping gas for your car at a certain petrol station, or disqualify you from getting points if you're using one of those middleman cashless services like GrabPay. No mention of the Visa and MasterCard duopoly worldwide, and how in 2025 they're now leveraging their stronghold that they have on payment processing to try to dictate what businesses can or cannot do, what products they can or cannot sell. No mention of this at all. No mention that if these processors or banks can force companies to do as they say, the amount of leverage, the significantly higher amount of leverage they have over you as the individual consumer. But if you don't use a credit card, you can always use Pay Now or Pay La or Do It La or Grab Pay or one of those other options where you just scan a QR code or the business will scan a QR code on your phone and that's a one-time payment, so you're not using Visa and MasterCard. Just use that law, you might say. Great. So now your banks can still track your purchases, and if they can track you, they can still target you and doing everything from pushing unwanted ads to you all the way to real financial harm and isolation from society. But obviously, this article isn't going to talk about the fact that banks can and will do things, depending on timing, of course, that risk you getting debanked because of something that you did. They're not going to talk about how Canada started debanking protesting truckers in 2022 because they disagreed with the government. No. Today, banks are working with the government to stop scams by scanning the contents of your phone, the apps that you have installed on it, and preventing you from using their banking app, aka accessing your account with your money in it, if their app doesn't like the other apps that you have installed on your phone. Tomorrow, what's to say that banks won't work with the government again in the next global health scare to prevent you from making any transactions at places where you're not allowed to be, unless you get the voluntary but mandatory but totally optional, we swear, medical procedures dictated by the rule makers. So convenient, you know? Now you won't have to scan any QR codes that pull up your health records, link to your digital ID to show your green tick to the shopkeeper anymore. Banks will just make it easier and more convenient by detecting your transaction and denying you from the premise in the first place. That's if the ALPR cameras at the parking lot doesn't deny you from entering the facility in the first place, or facial scans at the train stations stop you from boarding the train. Cashless is good. Banks are good. We care about your safety and security. Don't delay. Stop using cash and switch to cashless today. Again, Singapore is one of those countries that can have companies secretly opt you in to receiving their marketing and ad spam without a care in the world whether that's legal or not. And they can put on an act and tell you that they care about your privacy and security only to leak out literally millions of customer records with little to no worry, because at the end of the day, most of them will get a slap on the wrist and the government will say, run along now, don't want to keep those consumers waiting because they want to consume more of your product. It's really weird in a what the hell are these people thinking sort of way, when most of society here already knows and probably has experienced firsthand how companies fuck them over, how little the law actually protects the regular person from getting fucked over by said companies, and how little the authorities care about the regular person getting fucked over. Yet most of said society still continues to participate, and not just participate, but give their full support to these various companies and their agendas regardless. Like, some psychologist really needs to come up with a unique term for this flavor of Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, take a look at Reddit where this article was also posted. You can see from r/Singapore, from these comments, just how brainwashed some of these people are. Let me just name you 2 example comments of what people have to say. Simple. Allow for more EasyLink purchases. EasyLink, by the way, is a card that's used for mostly public transport and road tolls that they're trying to get into more of a general purpose card that people can use as a cashless way of paying for stuff. Another comment says, for the youth situation, banks could just create a prepaid debit card product where the parent or guardian has full control and oversight. Introduce usage restrictions such as category, time, and amount. So it's not enough for adults to get tracked based on their cashless purchases. It's not enough for people to be giving their babies an iPad to babysit them. You also need to give your babies and teenagers a freaking prepaid debit card so they can consume and get tracked just like the adults are right now as well. Like, it's fucking ridiculous. And you know, having said all of this stuff, I didn't used to be this guy with the fucking tinfoil hat that you see on this channel. I grew up in this part of the world, Southeast Asia. I've had all this consumerism and being fascinated by all these modern and shiny digital, all that brainwashing ingrained in my head since I was a kid. You know, when I lived in Asia and America, I was all about using my credit card and collecting those points you know? So when I moved to Europe for the first time, I was really baffled how the Germans were all about using cash only. And there's a longer story about that, you know, about how they arrived to that culture because of World War II, and during then they knew who lived where and how to track them down by going to their door and then disappearing them and whatnot. But I used to criticize them regardless as having this stupid, outdated dinosaur kind of mindset. Like, come on, it's almost 2020. Businesses should all accept credit cards because it's the future. All countries are doing it. That's the person that I used to be. But then I moved back to this part of the world, Southeast Asia, where I saw what all these countries were doing during the Corgi-19 era. Scan the QR code, show me a green tick. You know, green tick cannot enter. You have to get the vaccine. With literally next to 100% enforcement in Singapore. And it was also almost as bad in Malaysia and Indonesia in the sense that enforcement was surprisingly prevalent and strict considering how corrupt and lazy those two other countries are known to be. So I put a lot of two and twos together in my life, and in the last few years I've put even more two and two and two and two and two and two together. Which is when I realized, so that's why the Germans like to use cash and they hate cashless. Okay, even a broken clock is right twice a day. And that last line over here in this article, it may be the best piece of advice for anyone who doesn't want to live in a world where they will own nothing und eat the bugs. Many of the shops I buy things from accept cash. If they stop doing so, I will stop buying from them. That's what I've been doing for the last 4 years of my life. That's what you should be doing as well. And that's what you should start if you haven't already, because fuck cashless. That's it for today, and I hope you learned something. See you all in the next video. Goodbye.